To do this because I moved down to Florida roughly 16 years ago, and I moved to Aventura and then quickly thereafter to Hollywood. And quite frankly, going to Fort Lauderdale was really never on my radar up until a few years ago. So I've watched Fort Lauderdale grow. Our office is downtown. We're on Broward and Andrews. So being there, we're sort of watching really everything grow around us, and it's pretty exciting. And from the last panel we heard, we are adding all of these units, whether it be multifamily, office, and even hotel units to downtown Fort Lauderdale. But neighborhoods like Flagler Village, Flagler Heights, Progresso, Fat Village, these are names that we didn't hear even 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe some of the people in the room who are a little smarter than the rest of us knew about it because they were buying up that land. But before then, I never knew what any of those places were. So we're going to talk today with our panel here, and we're going to hear about from them really how the core of Fort Lauderdale has changed, what's in store for the future, and what's being done to connect our newly budding real city, not only internally but to the cities around us, and turn it into a city where really mobility is actually something that we focus on. So rather than do individual introductions, if you don't mind, I'm going to do the introductions myself for you. All right, I'm going to go in order what I got on paper here. So we've got Jeff Burns. Jeff, a little hand, there you go. Jeff's the co-founder and CEO of Affiliated Development. Throughout Jeff's career, he's been involved in developing over 2 million square feet of real estate with a combined cost of almost $500 million. Included in that roughly 1,200 residential apartment units that serve a wide variety of tenants, really from high luxury all the way down to low-income housing. And of a lot of these projects, Jeff's been able to incorporate public-private partnerships and various public financing sources. So it'll be interesting to hear Jeff's take. Charlie Ladd. All right, so Charles is founder and president of Barron Real Estate. Charles has got extensive experience providing full-service project management to his outside investors, in addition to developing his portfolio of owned real estate via JVs, and a lot of them are either on Las Olas, we've got that Louis Bossi and Tommy Bahama and other places, and then along US 1, Broward Boulevard and North, we include Fresh Market, Victoria Park Shops, and Paradise Bank. David Tapton, you are. So David's our parking guru on the stage here. His practice includes parking consulting, not only here, but nationally and even internationally. David's got expertise in parking, spans far and wide. He leads parking studies for municipalities, universities, hospitals, private developers, and other institutions. He's a passionate advocate for reform in parking planning practices, and was among the first in the parking industry to attain certification as a Park Smart Advisor. I want to hear what that is. All right, Jamie Sturgis. All right, so Jamie is the CEO of Native Realty. He specializes in leasing and investment sales in emerging markets throughout the Tri-County area. Most of us know Jamie because he's grown up in Broward, developed a lot of relationships and intimate knowledge of the market, which he leverages for himself and his clients, really gives them a competitive advantage. I personally witnessed that myself with some transactions that I've done with Jamie. He's represented a pretty prestigious group of clients: Coca-Cola, Barry's Boot Camp, C1, Integra Realty Resources, and so on. Alan? So Alan founded and operates Hooper Construction, Hooper Realty, and Hooper Management. He also co-founded Urban Street Development and is a co-founder in the Restaurant People. Over the past 25 years, his companies have designed, developed, constructed, managed, leased, and sold over 1.5 million square feet of neighborhood revitalization projects. So at a time when we talk about all these urban areas nationwide of this incredible change, really his niche redevelopment business focuses on areas within a downtown market that possess a high potential for growth and renewed lifestyle. So, making sense, Alan and his partners played a big role in redeveloping downtown Fort Lauderdale and the surrounding core neighborhoods by developing these boutique housing, office, retail, and food and beverage businesses. Last but not least, we have Sharif Ayad. Sharif is the founder and president of ID and Design International. It's a 65-person design and branding firm in Fort Lauderdale specializing in mixed use, hospitality, retail, food and beverage, entertainment, and multifamily projects. So now, although IDDI is an international firm with award-winning projects worldwide, it's actually a powerhouse locally here in Fort Lauderdale, with clients like Hilton, Marriott, Whole Foods, Starbucks, Royal Caribbean, iPic Theaters, Related Group, Styles, among others. So, the last panel was very interesting, right? And they touched on certain things. They touched upon growth, they touched upon transportation. But one of the things that I'd like to know, and I'm going to leave the questions up to the group as a whole. Jamie, you might want to fill this first one to get us started. Sure. So, your clients and you, it looks like you picked out some of the neighborhoods, or you picked on certain neighborhoods in Fort Lauderdale sooner than most. So what did you and your clients see in these surrounding neighborhoods that maybe other people missed, or maybe other people were afraid to take the risk on?
Sure. So identifying the neighborhoods isn't the tough part. The tough part is finding tenants crazy enough to follow you into them. And the same is true of the people I work with, right? We have to go out into these unproven emerging markets and convince people that this is going to be the next area. And there's a few key components that are required in order to achieve that. Critical mass is one of them, right? So we have to be the placemakers to bring all of the different owners together to have a unified vision to execute on it. Curation is another really important part of it. So all of the tenants need to be synergistic and working towards a common goal. And part of it is also the culture and the experience, right? So we really focus on these emerging neighborhoods close to the urban core, so they all have common characteristics, right? Favorable zoning, close proximity to the urban core, strong surrounding neighborhoods, all of those type of things. But again, without all of those components combined, of which it doesn't happen in individual silos, it's only as good as the tenants that follow us, the team that I have, which is absolutely amazing, and the landlords that we work with that are really pioneers, and they're going into these unproven markets, and they're trying something that doesn't have any pedigree or track record. So it's a consolidation of all of those components combined for the perfect storm that allows those neighborhoods to flourish.
Sure. So you've taken some risks on putting restaurants in places when people wouldn't put restaurants. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, and maybe what do you see that makes you take that risk?
So we took, aside from the restaurants for a second, we bought 2 acres of real estate on Andrews between 4th and 5th Street for $2 million around 2000. Today that property probably worth about 10 or 15 million. And we took a huge risk because that was the beginning of pioneering Flagler Village, which at the time was called Flagler Heights. Guys like Jim Ellis, Charlie Ladd, Peter Feldman, Doug McCraw, we were all in there buying things, knowing that the trend was coming that way someday. So we took a great deal of risk because we had a feeling that things were going to start moving into this area that was basically a canvas. And if you had any creative development mind, you knew that you could create something. And as a coalition of developers, at the time it was called the Flagler Village Improvement Association, we changed the name of the neighborhood. We changed the way people thought about it, and we turned it into, through branding and marketing alone, we turned it into a hot neighborhood. And then through development, we created it. And we knew that bringing people to the area was going to drive retail in the future. As far as restaurants go, we went into the Himmershey district when nobody would go into that area. That was it was very sleepy. The Broward Center had just been built about a decade earlier, and there was nobody investing money there. And so we came in and opened up a couple of restaurants, and as time went on, we started moving into the more core areas like Los Olas Boulevard. But all of these things take an incredible amount of risk with people's money, and you got to have vision. And at the time, even we were able to convince even the city commission and county commission to share a vision. and it caught on. So you really you've gotta have your pulse on where people are going, where the trends are going. Today it's a lot easier because there's tons of people that are building in that area, and it's a lot easier to identify where to land. The next thing is going to be what you're going to be talking about, which is connecting the neighborhoods.
Sure, so that leads me to the next question. So like, it's my opinion that if you compare Fort Lauderdale and its growth to the growth of, say, Miami, which has been completely explosive and in a lot of people's minds pretty uncontrolled, right? Traffic is just unsustainable, and I don't think there is any sort of solution for it. So how do you know, this is a question generally for anybody, how do you balance that sustainability versus density? And then how do you deal with attracting the people, the tenants, the businesses, to move there where they're not maybe sure about what the plan is going forward, right? Should we maybe take that?
I think, Fort Lauderdale is such a unique city, right? I moved here 22 years ago, and I really wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. I traveled all the time, and it's so nice to always come home. We are in a boutique city that is so unique, and most cities, you have a central core where you have a lot of office, corporate functions, and then everybody sort of, at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, sort of disperses and goes off to their suburbs. And we just don't have that. We are not your typical city. We've got tourism, we've got the cruise ship industry, we've got seasonal markets, we've got the empty nesters that want to be downtown, we've got millennials, we've got everybody, and there is no unified, single structure to what Fort Lauderdale is. So I don't know that there is a single answer to structure versus organic sort of internal growth. I was actually thinking also, standing back there, about the football question. And quite frankly, not that I want to go there, but I don't know that there is such an inning. I think it's really sector driven, and I think that when we might be second in certain sectors, and third, fourth in other sectors. And I think the beautiful thing about Fort Lauderdale is because of its diversity, it is not one answer. And we're going to see ups and downs in different sectors of the market, and that's really what keeps Fort Lauderdale, and I think is so positive about our future here. We're diversified enough to have a great future. Even internally within our own firm, quite frankly, what's helped us, we boomed during the recession because I think we were able to look at international markets. And I think just like Peggy earlier said, she's growing in the Chinese market and all this stuff, bringing investors back here. We've been fortunate and very blessed to diversify ourselves so that we have different sectors to our industry, from supermarkets to multifamily to entertainment, etc. And just as diversified as Florida is, we try to stay as diversified. I think that's what's been helpful.
So, we've been up here talking about these areas. So, Charles, we're talking about the surrounding areas, but Las Olas sometimes gets a little lost in the shuffle here because everyone's so focused on all these other core areas. Where do you see Las Olas going? Where do you see it changing? Is Las Olas growing up now?
It's a tough question. I've been involved in Flagler, I guess, as Alan said, really since early mid-90s. So we tend to get very excited about it just because we've come to the end of a long chapter, going from people laughing at that area saying it never happened to the precipice of being, a nationally prominent neighborhood similar to what we've seen in Portland and Nashville and some of these other cities. Las Olas, in the end, is still the main street of Fort Lauderdale, and it's the main street of Broward County. And as such, it is a very contentious street. There's very many fingers in that pot. The nicest, one of the highest end neighborhoods in Broward County is Las Olas Isles, that counts Las Olas as part of its neighborhood. There's the downtown area, there's the traditional merchants, there's the beach. So it's a street that everybody owns that defines Fort Lauderdale. I don't know if Mike Weymouth's still in the audience, but his family has controlled a large swath of the street for decades and decades and decades, and have been stewards kind of what happens there. And the street is basically, places go through transitions. We can remember Lincoln Road when it was basically a nothing. We can remember remember Ocean Avenue in South Beach. And Las Olas is in the process of going through a transition. And to be honest with you, I think all those groups are kind of right now trying to decide what it's going to be. Steve Hudson and I have a large parcel with approximately 500 feet of frontage around the Louis Bassi area. Another group that I've been involved in did the Louis Bassi, Tommy Bahama, and some of those shops right in that area on the east end. And I can tell you that our vision is, I see Beverly Hills. I see Rodeo Drive, I see high-end boutique hotels, residential surrounding that street that should get the, you know, we talk about live, work, play, and amenities. That's the epitome of amenities in our city. And we're going to go through that process over the next 10 years, and it's going to be a very interesting process because we all have a stake in what happens to that street because it defines our community. But the script is written in Flagler. The next, you know, we got a couple more chapters. We're going to have condos that follow the apartments. We're going to get the stuff, the amenities that go with living in a neighborhood. You know, we're going to have IPIC coming here in the next year or two on Federal Highway. So that script is written. You know, we know what's going to happen there, and it's truly exciting. Las Olas we know it's special. So the next step is going to be to figure out how to get everybody to march in the same direction.
That's really interesting. I never heard anybody quite frame it that way, that picture it being a Rodeo Drive. It certainly has the bones for it. And it is a beautiful street, so I can picture that. I never looked at it that way. So let's talk about, we have all this growth, and we talked about condos and multifamily. Let's talk about who's living there, right? And we talked about there's varying demographics, right? We can't really pinpoint one specific demographic. Jeff, let's talk a little bit about the kind of demographic that you're trying to help stay in the area, because with all this growth, we need people who can work here. And it's not easy to get to the area from other places. So, Jeff, tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are.
Sure. So we're doing a 142-unit project just west of the tracks on Sistrunk. Our project is tailored to be at a price point that will be attractive to a lot of the folks that service our city. As we continue to grow and we continue to offer these amenities, restaurants and everything else that people love to go to, we also add to our workforce. And so over time, we've seen a huge disparity between luxury market rate housing, which is obviously fulfilling a need and continues to do so, and affordable housing, which is more low income. There's state and federal programs that are tailored to help build affordable housing. We've been the beneficiary of some of that. But what we're really focused on is really kind of the middle income person who wants to live close to where they work, wants to live close to where they like to spend their time, but doesn't want to have to spend 60% of their income on housing. So when we look at the downtown, there's been a lot of numbers thrown out, 10,000, 5,000 common, this and that. I tend to agree with Dave. I think he made a very good point that when you look at Fort Lauderdale, you got to look at it on a much broader level. So when you talk about Danny and Pompano and some of these cities that feed off of Fort Lauderdale, we're also looking at people tenants for our building that right now could be living in Davie. And the reason they're living in Davie is not because they work there, it's not because they enjoy the restaurants in Davie, it's because it's more affordable. And one of the things I know we're going to touch on a little bit later is transportation. And it's a big thing. Any city meeting you go to these days, there's folks that show up and they talk about, we're doing more development, what that's going to do to traffic. I think if we can do a better job of locating our workforce close to where they work and close to where they like to spend their time, I think that'll help alleviate a lot of our traffic concerns as well. So,
All right, well, that's kind of a good segue from what I term our growth portion over to transportation. And, I'll even start off with parking, because David, you're all the way down there. I want to get you going in this. So we talked about how parking requirements are changing, and we were speaking before about how, the municipalities are now letting buildings go up with reduced parking requirements. Seems like they're going to put a movie on it here. So we've got these different parking requirements now. So, thinking about what we're talking about with Las Olas and the surrounding areas. I mean, even when I go to Fat Village, if I can't walk because it's too hot, it's very hard to park over there, quite frankly. So why don't you talk a little bit about parking and how people are envisioning parking going forward?
Yeah, so, and Kimley Horn, we recently did a downtown parking study for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And one of the big findings was there's a ton of available parking. Now, people don't see it, they don't know how to access it, and that creates a restraint and a feeling, I don't want to go to downtown Fort Lauderdale, and even businesses and developers, they feel that bind. And so it's about being creative on how do we access this parking that is there. And so a lot of cities are starting to change the parking requirements in overlay districts so that they're potentially eliminating parking requirements and creating more shared parking agreements and creating those contracts and those connections between businesses so that the parking assets get maximized to most of their potential. And so it's not just thinking about, we're building, 1,000 square or 100,000 square foot building, we need to provide X number of parking. It might be about, okay, where else can we create a shared parking agreement? And it can make it more feasible for the developer, more attractive for the community, because we are seeing down the line with shared mobility and the potential for autonomous vehicles that the parking demand is going to decrease. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to invest in an asset that potentially is invaluable in 10, 20 years, when a parking garage can last for 30, 40, 50 years potentially. So it's kind of a slowly changing process, but you got to be thinking about the future.
Sure. So they spoke before on the last panel about the amazing growth, but also there's been no real corresponding increase in our ability to move around. And I'd like to know, and this is open to anybody who wants to jump in, what do you think the biggest transportation-related problem is in Broward County right now?
I think it's a lack of political understanding. I think it's a lack of respect for the work that engineers and other agencies have put into place to try to connect neighborhoods. The most recent was the WAVE. Some people might like it, some people might not, but that took about 15 years to put together. It was going to bring about $200 million in financing, and it was tossed aside. And I'm not sure that the millennials or the Gen Zs would have been so unhappy about it when it got built. I think it was a different group of people that were kind of shutting it down. I think it was folks that have lived here for a long time that don't want to see a whole lot of change. Because now, the next deal that's being worked on, the next deal is the MPO is trying to help and to promote and to pitch turning Andrews and 3rd into two transit streets that include one transit lane. That's kick the can down the road. And I think that's the biggest thing. And then today, we're voting on a penny sales tax. And there's a lot of people that are against that because it's hard to plan 30 years down the road. But you know what? If we don't fund it through sales tax and let the tourists participate to a 30% pro rata share, then someday the problem is going to become gridlock, and it's going to be us, all our property taxes, paying for 100% of the bill. So sometimes you just gotta kind of see the big picture and look out into the future and say, I'm taking a bit of a leap. The WAVE may have not been the best transit vehicle. Maybe it was okay. But we got to take a leap sometimes, and we can't just trash plans because of political underpinnings of emotions and other things. I think that really stagnates us. And I'll tell you one other thing. The Bright Line is a gift. It's a gift, okay? And why the city and the county, if they don't step up to the plate and touch the Brightline station and finish the last mile, okay, which connects the whole downtown, the beach, to the Brightline, to give those folks that show up in Fort Lauderdale to experience all the things that we're developing. If we don't finish that last mile, it's unfathomable that we would do that. We have got to invest in finishing the Brightline, because it is a gift.
So I can appreciate that, because my office building is on Broward and Andrews, and when I'm on the phone, I often look out the window and wish to be somewhere else. I look down and I see tourists walking, like, to the Brightline and from the Brightline, and I feel bad for them, because it's not a nice 3-4 block walk. It's fraught with homeless people. There's just not a good element there, and they've got to do something there, and I wonder what it is that they can do to clean that up, because I don't know that there are many solutions, but like you said, I mean, there's got to be some solutions. So you want to jump in there?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, Alan's 100% correct. You know, one of the things, going back to your very first question, you talk about cities that are growing very quickly. You know, Fort Lauderdale is certainly one of them. And you have to plan years and years out. Not only our city planners, but our developers have a responsibility to do that as well. And, you know, you have three major issues when you grow as fast as we're growing. One of them is infrastructure. I think we're all learning a lot about that. The other one is transportation and mobility. And the third is affordable housing. These are all three things that need to be on the forefront of everybody's minds every time a project is approved and every time a new development is proposed. These things need to be on the forefront of our mind. I agree with the connectivity to the Brightline. I take it probably three times a week. You know, we office within walking distance to the station. I get down the escalator and I see folks that arrive here for the first time. This is their first experience in Fort Lauderdale. They walk out and they look around and they have this look like, now where do I go? Right? And you know, Flagler Village is becoming an area where we're going to have that critical mass, where we're going to have thousands and thousands of people living within that area. The biggest thing from a transportation standpoint that gets forgotten is walkability. You know, I walk to lunch over to Top Hat from my office on Andrews all the time. That is not an easy walk. You got to be an athlete to get from point A to point B. And you go to a lot of cities. You go to Chicago, for instance. My brother lived there for 10 years. It's 0 degrees out, and people are doing what? They're walking. They're walking 6 miles, or not 6 miles, 6 blocks to work, freezing their butts off, because it's a walkable city. And I think Fort Lauderdale needs to do a better job of moving people around in the streets, especially at night, to make people feel safe, light the streets up, and create a pedestrian experience that people can embrace, especially in an area like Flagler Village, which is going to experience as much residential development that's coming online.
Yeah, a couple of things. In terms of connectivity to Brightline, there are things happening. I sit on the DDA. We're in the process of re-streetscaping Southwest 2nd Avenue from Broward Boulevard south to 2nd Street. That should be done, I would think, in about a year. And we'll be reworking the parking, putting in landscaping, trees, tree canopy, wide sidewalks, etc., lighting. So there is hope, and I know Alan gets emotional about this stuff, which is understandable, because it's been a long slog. And I think when we look at Fort Lauderdale, probably the most important thing is to have perspective. And in our industry, perspective is really important because we're dealing with decades at a time. And when I look at Fort Lauderdale, I look at a city that has all the stuff. One of the very few cities, really, in the southeast United States. We have a port, we have a huge beach with 5,000 hotel rooms, county seat, regional airport, the whole list. Lauderdale has all the stuff. And historically, the mood of Fort Lauderdale was kind of like, we got all the stuff, so we don't really need to try. And so we watched cities like Delray really put everything they have to make themselves special and to reclaim some genuineness and some marketability. We watched Boca, you know, people look at Meisner Park. The city spent $100 million up there on infrastructure to accommodate Meisner Park, you know, while that Kmart shopping center to be redeveloped into what it is today. basically rebuild their whole east side of their city. So you look at a city like Lauderdale that for years, and I think a lot of it was driven by the yachting industry, where this was a yachting town. So it's kind of like, we got what we need, we don't need all this thing. We just by luck have all these other pieces that make a great city. And what's happened in the last 20 years is the downtown now has enough critical mass of residents that have embraced this lifestyle that the politics are going to change. And that downtown group is going to say, we want to be a world-class city. So things like the Wave, they'll be revisited, and you're going to see amazing momentum in this downtown over the next 10 years because we've spent the last 30 years actually getting to the point where we're legitimate. And it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that people, I see people at Top Hat, and I'll see a young couple with a kid, and there's an older couple with them that are obviously one of the parents. And it's almost like the parents are there to say, is it legitimate to live here now? Since you left Parkland or wherever the hell you came from. And it's legitimate. And the explosion of what's going to happen in the next 5 years is going to be very exciting.
I totally agree. I think what we're seeing now is an explosion for a lot of those, and that is just barely the beginning. The potential of where things are going to go into Flagler Village. Yes, there's so much still growth to happen. Mass, which is the arts, music and arts district south of Sunrise, and even Wilton Manors, I think, has so much potential, and there's so much potential there for growth that really we haven't even tapped into that market. And then even going south to Rio Vista, again, other areas around the area and I think what Jeff is doing is amazing. I think he's a pioneer in going out on Sistrunk and developing the project. We're doing it, by the way, but we're developing the project there because truly that is the vision of what's to come, and that's going to alleviate all this concern about transportation and gridlock. I think, we just have to look at the surrounding areas of this beautiful core that we have and all the potential future, and it truly is just the beginning.
So Jamie, I was going to ask you, what are you hearing from your clients? What are you hearing from your potential landlords and tenants and owner-operators?
Sure. Well, so I was just going to add to Jeff's point, Flagler Village is amazing, right? I'm the biggest cheerleader for that neighborhood. However, today, it is a little bit of a retail desert, right? So it's tough to walk from the Mass District to Fat Village and get up on Alborg, Florida, right? There's 2 block jumps. So you go Mass District, Flagler Uptown, Fat Village, Alborg, Florida. I think moving forward, we need to be cognizant of the fact that new developments have to have mixed-use components to it, right? There's a number of developments that have 300, 400 units that have been built in the neighborhood with 0 retail, 0 office, and it's crazy. And it creates an opportunity for guys like us, right? We create these retail opportunities, and you all of a sudden have kind of a competitive advantage on the neighborhood because no one else is doing it. But from a true walkability standpoint, it's just not sustainable. So I think moving forward, the city has an obligation to make sure that new projects that are being developed, like Jeff's, which is going to have an amazing restaurant at the bottom of it, create that opportunity where you can walk 1 block to the next and continue to have stimuli and opportunities to go in and shop. In regards to what people are looking for, again, it's the retail and creative office, right? So, I mean, you look at Flagler Village, you're talking about doubling the population in the next 12 to 18 months, and it's a 3 to 5x on top of that. I mean, those are crazy numbers. But a lot of that's being built without any retail or creative office to service it. So you have all these young millennials that are living in these buildings, they have disposable income, they have good jobs, but they want to be able to live, work, and play, right? That's the mantra of our neighborhood, but we're not really living up to it in a lot of senses, where we're not building the creative retail, we're not building the creative office to allow them to not be so reliant on the car. And all this ties back into transportation, right? If you can live, work, and play all in the same location, you could ride a Lime scooter from your apartment to work, and that completely takes a vehicle off the road. So I think it's incumbent upon us as brokers, developers, and also the city that moving forward, we have that in mind that we need to start to meet some of that demand. I mean, there's a lot of people looking for tech and other office space within Flagler Village, and we just don't have the supply to service it at the moment.
And we're also moving from walkability to Uberville.
100%.
So it's kind of Ubers really are changing the way we're looking at cities, not just here, but throughout.
One thing, just to speak to what Jamie's saying there, we don't have a lot of, you're putting up a ton of units, okay? And I'm going to tell you right now, Broward and Dade are unique because we are landlocked, and we are locked by the Everglades, and we're locked by boundaries on both sides of the county, and we are built out. So freaking out over 10 cranes being up in the air, well, I got news for you. Even with a bad market, there's going to be cranes in the air because people are coming and people need a place to live, and it's going to be vertical and it's going to be in the core. Okay? So if all this is happening, it's an opportunity for us to start building office space and drawing talent into this housing stock and drawing companies and showing them all the amenities. If we had connectivity with some sort of a transit system, could be anything, could be Uber, could be modern-looking train buses. Whatever you got to do to make your connections to the Las Olases of the world, to the beach of the world, to the Mass District, to Flagler Village, to the south of the river, and to the airport. Whatever you've got to do that, we need to be doing it, okay? And then we need to attract companies. And what's going to be attractive to these companies are going to be the 10,000 units that are sitting in Flagler Village and 10,000 more that are going to be south of the river that are housing talented young people. And that's going to be what drives us. That's what drove Miami. The last cycle that went down, they overbuilt like crazy. I think it was 60,000 units, okay? Our city went into a moratorium and we didn't overbuild during the last boom, okay? What happened in Miami? Companies started to show up over there because there was all this cheap housing, okay? And what was Fort Lauderdale doing? Nothing. We didn't overbuild. We just kind of, and to the detriment of a few brokers, a few banks, and a few developers, Miami went up the mark. And what happened to retail? And what happened? Started filling up because there were units, okay? So units are a good thing. Vertical is a good thing. It's the most consolidated way to develop in a very green way. And until we get a ton of units, the next move is going to be office space and retail. And that's coming. And Charlie is a testament to that. And you're going to see Fat Village change in a big way because that's where it's going to go. We're going to try to attract corporations, and we're going to try to attract and retain talent by having good transportation and workforce housing.
All right, so then what's the clean slate idea? What's the crazy idea that you're like embarrassed to say? Like, how do we get everything connected in a way that really makes sense for us, right? What's something that, I don't even know if I should say this, right? Somebody come up with, do you have any idea about what you think it would look like, David?
Well, I was just going to say, you guys all have great ideas, and it's like, let's go big, get every company here. But I think it has to be thoughtful. I don't think it just has to be 1,000 units, and it has to be thoughtful in its approach, so that you're thinking about when you're developing something, you're creating something that is mixed use, it's walkable, it's connected, it makes sense for the community. It's not just like 1,000 residential units in one area because it economically makes sense. So I think it's kind of a change in thought of just every project should have its place and its connectivity and its mixed use, and that it's not just creating sort of a desert with a gate that you have to, I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in the DC area, those places really had problems. They had growing pains. Fort Lauderdale's like at the cusp of starting to experience that. It's not bad enough yet, but it's going to get bad enough. And so I think it's up to developers sort of throughout the process to sort of just be mindful of that and not to just be thinking about the bottom line.
I don't have one crazy idea. I can tell you what I think is going to happen. I think that's what is going to happen is that we have organic growth in downtown Fort Lauderdale. And historically, the theory was if you go get a big company like American Express, which was discussed in the earlier panel, then the residential follows it. These later generations do it a little differently. In the cities that are hot right now, the residential is driving the commercial. So Portland, those kids went to school out there, they didn't want to leave. So the companies came out there and met the kids. And what we have happening in Flagler is people want to live in Flagler. And the commercial and the retail, restaurants, etc., are coming to meet those people. The office is going to follow right behind it. We did some office deals on Federal Highway where Doc B's is. Those tenants are ecstatic to be there. We have a boutique building, you know, Jamie talks about a dearth of commercial space. We're gonna do a 3-story boutique building on 3rd Avenue. We see great office interest from people that want to be in that community. So I see downtown much more organic and much more of an interesting neighborhood than what's been done in a lot of other places, a lot of other parts of the country.
I totally agree, and I think just looking at that residential that Charlie's talking about, that's kind of driving it all, just even within that Fort Lauderdale core, urban core, there's so much product coming to market. You know, there's about 5,000 units coming to market, and you know, it's not even that they're competing with amenities. You know, we looked at the condo market grow in Miami, and everybody was competing with amenities. You know, one guy puts a bowling alley, the other guy puts a, you know, whatever. Bungee jumping or something crazy. And so, but, you know, now I think it's what's driving the comps within the core area with all these towers coming up is more style versus amenities. I think people are finding within a 10-minute walk of each other completely diversified offerings in these multifamily projects. So, and we're very fortunate to be, you know, collaborating on a lot of this, but you know, you've got the Styles Rollo project on the river, which is, you know, very Styles-like. It's very classic. It's elegant. It's timeless. It's pure. It's, you know, and then we're doing the Gray Star project right behind Starbucks at the corner of Broward and Federal, and that's very dark and sultry, and kind of sexy, and it's a whole different vibe. It's, you know, they're both targeting empty nesters, but 2 completely different offerings within literally walking distance from each other. And up the street on 3rd, you've got Art Falcone's project, The Rise, which is another 30-story, but that one's like all concrete and urban and cool, and you know, it's got a real urban vibe to it. Jeff's project is all techie and a real cool young vibe to it. You know, they're all different, and I can go on and on and on, but all the projects are offering different styles from the North Flagler area, where Mill Creek is going to be developing across from the Parker Playhouse, to, you know, to the Flagler Village itself. And then the Flagler offering is, I mean, we've got people that work in our office, we're up all the way up in Commercial and Dixie, but they live downtown because they want to, and they don't mind, you know, paying a premium to live there. But young people that live downtown, we've got people that take the Bright Line to Miami for meetings from my office, because, you know, one of our accounts there, you know, a couple of times a week, we have to send 2 or 3 people down to Miami, and they take the Bright Line because they prefer to. So I think people find a way, and people choose to live by their lifestyle, not so much by amenity. And I think the market is changing. They're not thinking about going out to Pembroke Pines, you know, until they have kids. But right now the offering is the core, and there's enough diversity in the core to please everybody.
So I've got a few questions that I've been compiling from the audience over the last 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to start rattling them off, and you guys answer it as you see fit. So the one question actually that someone sent me, which I asked to start, it's what's your favorite restaurant? Alan, obviously you're a little bit of a
YOLO, baby.
So is it true, and I don't know if I've heard this is true, but I heard that the Drake song came after he ate at YOLO. Is that true? I feel like you would know that.
We've got a copyright on that. YOLO.
All right, so what's everyone's favorite restaurant? We'll just start there.
Southport.
Castaneda.
I'm a One Door East Timpano.
Any deli.
It's a top hat.
Yeah, that place is good.
So I'm going to take a kind of a stark contrast to the last question and go in a different route. But obviously, you know, we got the Covenant House, which is right here down the street. The homelessness problem in Fort Lauderdale. For you guys, is that something that needs to be solved? Is something that you guys are thinking about when you're putting your projects together? Tell me a little bit about that and how you think about that when building your projects in some of these neighborhoods that are more socioeconomically deprived.
And Charlie can answer that one.
I've been active in development along that Federal Highway corridor since 1994. So a lot of people may not remember historically what was there, but the east side of Federal on the border of Victoria Park was horrible, as was most of Flagler. So I think there's really 2 issues that we have to deal with as a city. One is when you have substandard housing, you're going to have certain people living there. And we've been eliminating a lot of that stuff over the last 20 years, and we're close to having a sea change there in Flagler. Victoria Park is pretty well finished. Everything's been eliminated, demolished, and redeveloped. So that's one problem, that as a city, we need to redevelop and get rid of the substandard housing, which brings us substandard tenants. The homeless issue is a tough issue because you have people that are generally sick, and what do you do? And as a city right now, we're not doing a very good job of it when you just park them all next to the library and say, let's go destroy the core of our downtown. So it's a big problem and it's not easily solved.
So Gary Rosen is managing partner of our firm, is working on a project with United Way, and they're taking public money and private money, and they're trying to find ways to house the homeless, and they're modeling this after some very successful projects that have been done, I believe in Orlando and in Utah. And so they're working very hard at that, and they feel that there's a certain percentage of the people right now who are in these homeless encampments, basically, that will be able to move into housing. But it's going to take a true public-private partnership. And they're very well aware, and it's right across the street from my office. I see it every day. So I think they're taking great strides to doing that. And meanwhile, we're still going ahead and building, and I think the problem, as long as everyone's aware of it, it'll eventually get taken care of to an extent.
So, to David's point that you made a couple of minutes ago about building smart, right? That a lot of that has to do with the infrastructure. So I got a couple of questions throughout that last panel with, how ready is the city of Fort Lauderdale and greater Fort Lauderdale for growth in terms of its infrastructure? Like what needs to be done? What are your feelings about that?
So on the sewage and water, the developers come in, the larger developers come in and they upgrade. They increase the size of the pipes, the capacity, they do redundancy around the block. The smaller guys that come in and they just do their 100 feet or 200 feet, or gals. And then the other thing is, capacity at the city level. And the truth is that there is capacity at the city level. The truth is that the pipes have been ignored for 5 or 6 decades, and they started to crack, just like the pipes underneath your house. You're not going to start fixing pipes until they crack. And so they started to crack recently, and the city is fixing them. So this city is more than capable of handling its development. I think we're going through a cycle right now that is a little bit faster than we're used to, but it was from pent-up demand that occurred from the last cycle and the 8 years of downtime that we had. But if it grows more slowly and more in an incremental process, I think infrastructure can be dealt with. Power is going to be an issue, but I think FP&L can get in front of that. Excellent.
So, one other thing to add to that point too is, how many units are coming online in Flagler Village, and what are impact fees, essentially, per unit? So,
let me answer that. I did a $30 million project. My impact fees were about $2 million in terms of parks, everything. $2 million in permit fee.
Well, to give people, is that a lot or a little? Maybe not everybody in the room knows if that's a lot or a little.
I wish I had $2 million in my pocket. That's a lot of money. And for it not to get reinvested into the parks that it was taken from in downtown. So what happens is the money goes outside of downtown. It goes all over the city.
that's right. So, you pay city fees and you pay county fees. And, obviously with Fort Lauderdale being a city in Broward County that's growing the fastest, I think that, obviously we have the greatest need and should be the biggest beneficiary of those dollars. But, to Alan's point earlier, when we had this period of time where there really wasn't growth occurring, we didn't have a tremendous amount of resources set aside because the developers are the ones that pay those fees. So now that we're seeing that come in, I think more and more units that get built, you're going to see a lot more money going into that, and it's going to be able to be spent on the infrastructure.
So to that point, I think this is something that everyone can really touch upon, but we were talking about affordability and sustainable housing and kind of just growth in general of the workforce. But what is really the difference for, from attainable market rate rental apartments to affordable housing? Obviously, you've got federal programs and agency programs, which that's very much affordable housing. But the way that the word is thrown around a lot of the time in the industry is like, oh, this is an affordable project, where it's a market rate rental project. But so talk a little bit about that, because Jeff, obviously.
Sure. So a lot of people don't realize that South Florida is the most cost burdened place in the entire country. So you can go to D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, New York. Obviously, you're going to pay more in rent, but their incomes are higher. So the discrepancy between the income and your cost of living is the greatest here of anywhere else in the country. Where that really strikes people is not in the low income bracket. It does obviously affect them greatly, but more from the 80% of the AMI income range. And then in Broward County, we've pushed it all the way up to 140, and in some cases 160% of AMI. So AMI at this time is roughly, $40,000, $42,000 a year. So folks that are making 80% of that to folks that are making 140% of that, those are the ones that are being most affected by this. Currently, there aren't a great deal. In fact, we had a meeting with HUD up in Jacksonville about a month ago, and we said, we're interested in building workforce housing. And HUD said, we don't recognize that term. I said, well, if you come to South Florida, you recognize it because it smacks you in the face, right? So it's a real thing. It's happening, and I think there's a huge need for the luxury product that's being built. I think more and more people are moving here. I'm a good example of that. This is a great place to live. We can all attest to that. But I think we have, as we continue to grow and do more restaurants, do more hotels, and stuff like that, we've got to figure out a way that we can provide a nice Class A property for folks that are earning a decent income. And so it's not low income, it's a good income.
So to that point, I have a question for Sharif, who's the designer architect on the panel, who's designing a lot of these things. Now, you don't necessarily do workforce affordable housing, but having said that, from your perspective,
By the way.
well, you do, so there you go.
It's still aspirational.
Just tell me to shut up.
No.
I'm just joking. So from that perspective, right, because like, as an example, I was in a conversation the other day with a financial underwriter and a contractor. And they were talking about, well, I need it to be at $399 a square feet, but hey, what I designed is only, it's $425 a square feet. So there's always a disconnect, there seems to be, between what's being designed and what the cost is. And because cost continues to rise, hard costs in construction, what are you seeing with your firm, or what are some of the things that you guys are doing to kind of mitigate that, the value engineering type stuff?
Well, I think a lot of developers were dumping tons of money into amenities. And quite frankly, like I said earlier, we're focusing much more now on providing services and style versus just dumping a hell of a lot of money into amenities. And that's helping to mitigate some of the construction costs and unexpected increase in costs that we're sort of experiencing right now, and a lack of labor and a lack of everything else. So I think just really go heavy on differentiation, product differentiation, and branding strategies to market the property and market the product properly, and versus amenities.
So on the affordable housing side, I think Jeff will agree with me here. The fact is that the state of Florida does a horrible job of funding it from a subsidy standpoint. Construction is costing what construction costs. His project is the same cost per square foot as one of my market rate projects, correct? So at the end of the day, we need to subsidize to make projects affordable. And the state of Florida has a lottery system that just doesn't work, okay? And then the county is just on the ballot today, wants to have a housing trust fund, okay? Because it's a problem. And we're not getting any funding. Our county is a donor county, the state of Florida, we get nothing back. So at the end of the day, we have to subsidize it. It's either going to come from the county paying for it through property tax, which really the community should fund into, or some other source of funding. There is a gap. There's a gap, and there's no other way to fix it. We are falling behind by hundreds and thousands of units a year. And if we don't come up with some source of funding, and it ain't coming from the state, and it ain't coming from the Sadowski funds and all those other, we have to figure it out as a community.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it has to happen on the local level. What happens is you go further north in the state of Florida and they say this is South Florida's problem. This isn't our problem. And you go into other parts of the county and they say, this is a Fort Lauderdale problem. It's their problem, let them fix it. And at the end of the day, that's what has to happen. People with the greatest problem are the ones that need to come up with a solution.
So here's the last question, and then we'll have everyone get out of here, because I'm sure you're tired of listening to me stand up here. So, opportunity zones. There's a bit of the unknown there, right? But this is the hot button item now in commercial real estate all over the country. And we are going to be doing a bunch of opportunity zone events all over the country as well, so stay tuned. But from your guys' perspective, where is the growth? I mean, from what we know now, from the legislation that came out a few weeks ago, what's your feeling on opportunity zones? Do you all have opportunity zone funds? Kind of what do you think that the future holds for opportunity zones? And Alan, I see that you're not going to pull any punches here, so please.
So our partners and I own a very significant parcel that sits in an opportunity zone that just kind of landed in our lap because the opportunity zone is essentially a way to shelter or defer capital gains events, to put them into a fund, to invest within these blighted areas. Jeff is in an opportunity zone on Sistrunk. And then if you hold it there long enough, you can actually write off the capital gains that you make on that particular project. And beyond a CRA or some other government-funded incentive, this is the capital market giving a tax benefit or deferral and what that does is it gives people the opportunity to invest in something where they see real return on their pocket. And you're going to see these blighted areas nationwide. You're going to see a lot of investment going into them. And if someone comes up with a creative way to do it, you might see more workforce housing being built because of it. But Sistrunk is sitting genuinely in the middle of it. Fat Village is sitting in it. And I think it's going to make a difference. It's going to push a shift that the CRA just wasn't able to do using government incentives.
We're actually going to be utilizing it on our project on Sistrunk. So that part of our capital on that project will be through an opportunity fund. I mean, if you think about it, I think this is going to be a major program. I think it's going to help reshape a lot of these communities that are on the cusp. You know, if you just think about it from the standpoint of how successful the 1031 program has been, you know, you can make an argument that this is better. You can take your original principal balance and put it back in your pocket and simply invest the gain. So that gain you're investing will then receive a deferral treatment for a period of time, and it gets stepped up over a period of time until 2026. And if you hold that investment for a period of 10 years, your new gain is completely exempt. So it is a tool that helps drive returns when you're making an investment, and I think it'll enable a lot more exposure to some of these markets that could really use this type of investment.
So to build what was already said, if you hold the asset for 5 years, you get a 10% exemption, and if you hold it for 7, you get a 15% exemption, and that's huge. I mean, that's essentially wiping out your capital gains. We're already seeing the impacts of this. We're seeing calls from major institutional investors, you know, $50, $100, $150 million funds that otherwise would never look at these neighborhoods. And we're talking Progresso, we're talking 13th Street, we're talking Flagler Village, and beyond. So I think it's going to be revolutionary in the way that capital is deployed into neighborhoods that otherwise would never be on their radar.
All right, so we've got a question from the audience.
Alan, this is kind of directed at you. My name is Chris Rotella. I work for the Rotella Group here in Fort Lauderdale. We do retail. So I got an undergrad in real estate, a master's in real estate development. Talked about a lot of the things that we talked about today. But a big thing, obviously, was the transportation and how to think outside the box. So I have this crazy idea, and you asked if anybody had a crazy idea. And I just wanted to kind of plant a seed. You know, when you do come into Fort Lauderdale, even if you were to walk from the Bright Line to basically Fort Lauderdale Beach, it's not very attractive. There's not really much to look at until you really get into the aisles. So my idea, because everybody else's idea kind of seems to be the Lime, which is, the Lime's awesome. My brother's like the biggest proponent of it. But every time I'm on it, I'm just praying that nobody hits me. And every other transportation trendy as kind of like the wave and everything is keeping things on the ground, which isn't really relieving much of the traffic. It's still kind of creating congestion. So my proposal is to basically use a gondola system to go from the Bright Line straight down Las Olas Boulevard, and you would basically have 3 or 4 stops. One would be at the new park that they're creating on Las Olas in A1A, so you'd be able to get people right there. The next stop could be at 15th in Las Olas at your property where Fork and Balls was. We're opening that new sushi restaurant, and potentially another site could be at over the where they're building the new park over the tunnel, and then from there. But in my opinion, what it does is, unlike most other places in the world that have awesome views of mountains and things like that, what we have is 300 nautical miles of intercoastal, and that's what makes Fort Lauderdale special. So I think if we could get people up into the air, let them see our flat landscape and really see how beautiful it is, the water and things like that, that could potentially be a game changer and also be something for the rest of the world to talk to us about, or talk about us and say, Fort Lauderdale has this awesome new way of transportation, and it could be something, just something to see the plan. I know my dad thinks it's crazy, but you guys are all crazy up there, so maybe it's something you like.
Dude, you are a Leonardo da Vinci, okay? Let's give a big hand for a guy that has a vision and is willing to express it in public. It's that creative thought that will take us into the future, and I think it's great.
They had proposed that in D.C. to go from Arlington into the Georgetown area. It never took
There
shape.
we go. All right, so it started here. Just remember, it started here. Major thank you to our panel. Big round of applause for you all. Our next event, downtown in South Florida, is December 4th. It's our Palm Beach County State of the Market. If you want to find out more, well, you're going to find out more because we'll be emailing you. So have a wonderful one. Thank you.